If religion were true, its followers would not try to bludgeon their young into artificial conformity, but would merely insist on their unbending quest for truth, irrespective of artificial backgrounds or practical consequences.
For the time will come when people will not put up with sound teachings. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers who say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths.
The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown.
Be not afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent. Today we have 10 questions for atheists in 2022. We've had this one bookmarked for a while to take a look at. Apologies that it's a late response by about 2 months.
It was bound to happen. We're very new. Forgive us.
Let's see what Ashlee Keyton has to say, though.
What's going on, guys? This is Ashlee Keyton.
Call me old-fashioned, but when I saw Ashlee Keyton, I wasn't expecting a beautiful full beard.
I was thinking about a girl too, to be honest.
That's not an attack on your character. I love your beard, dude.
It's actually a really nice beard and mustache combo.
I just wasn't ready. I'm sorry.
I have 10 questions for atheists, agnostics, and people who believe in a higher power but don't, for some reason, want to call it God. Here we go. First question. Does objective evil exist?
Weird jump cut there. You couldn't do that in one take?
Also,
Hang on, let me watch that again. Your voice line didn't match up. Anyways, would you like to go first on this one, Farrett?
personally, no. Evil is something that we've discovered ourselves, sadly, and something that is a byproduct of the mind in a twisted way. It's unhealthy. Most words have been made up by humans anyway.
I would say no. Nothing objective exists unless observed to be so. And if objective evil exists, then we have to define what objectively is evil. And if something's objective, then there can be no room for a case-by-case basis. And I don't think there's any such thing. And you might say, oh, what about this situation? What about that situation? And even if you were to go to the most extreme situations, one easy one that everyone jumps to is raping children. Okay, yes, I would agree that that's evil. Most of us would agree that that's evil. Now I'm going to need you to define what a child is, and now I'm going to need you to realize that in past cultures, what we just defined as a child or rape is, both were not defined as such, and both were not considered evil. What is evil is entirely dependent on the current society that the person in question finds themselves within. We create morality. And whether or not something can be objective, you must find a standard that you're measuring it to.
I'm just waiting on you to answer the question.
Well played. I can appreciate your sense of humor in this video. It's appreciated.
Number 2. Can you define objective evil for me?
No.
I believe we just did that.
I can't really explain it too well, personally, because I'm not the brightest.
If we have to define what an objective evil is, then we would have to say that something is being measured by some standard to create objective evil. You have to create the measuring stick by which you can objectively measure something. For instance, we can objectively say 2 plus 2 is 4, but that's only if we're all working from the same measuring system of the same units of measurement. For instance, if objectively we're in binary, then that question is meaningless. So to create objective evil, you would have to have an agreed upon measurement system, an agreed upon goal. Here's a good example. Were we to say that our objective goal as a unit is to create as many children as possible, then we could have an argument about whether or not my example of raping children is objectively evil or not. Whereas if our objective scale, our scale of measurement, is protection of the welfare and mental well-being of children, then we're going to come to a very different objective measurement on its evil. But you have to have a scale to measure on to create something objective. Also, for the purposes, I should say, obviously, I consider harming children wrong. But that's because I'm working on the objective moral scale that we should protect children and their mental well-being.
Number 3, and this one's my favorite. Have you ever honestly tried Jesus? He's all right.
Yes.
Yes.
I spent most of my life as a Christian. I was born into a Christian family. I was baptized at 19 by my own choice and volition. I have spent my entire life up until the past several years in the church, actively part of the church. I was part of various worship teams. I was actively an apologetics proponent for a very long time. Yeah, I've tried Jesus. It really is kind of meaningless. If anything, I found the Christian community to be absolutely toxic when you came down to it. A lot of the worst parts of my life were spent thinking that I couldn't get more help because I was praying and Jesus wasn't answering, and I must not be believing or praying hard enough, when all of my heart and soul was going into begging for answers and begging for his help. When, wow, 2 months of therapy could have solved the whole entire thing.
Mine's a bit more interesting. I grew up Mormon, and at a really young age, I realized how weird it was, and broke myself off from it slowly without causing suspicion and risking myself getting hurt.
Overall, Jesus is pretty cool or all right. It sounds nice when you're in the religion. Mm-hmm. When you're out of the religion, it sounds about as stupid as, have you ever tried voting Democrat? Hillary Clinton is pretty all right. Or, for the other side, have you ever tried voting Republican? Trump's pretty all right. That's how stupid it sounds.
And both of those statements made my ears bleed.
We're not talking about the biblical text or Christians. Have you ever tried God out? Sincerely. And I'm not assuming that you haven't. I just want to hear different answers on this to see who has really tried Jesus out.
I feel like that question is somewhat meaningless. Yes, I tried God out. We're not counting the text or the people. The text or the people, however, can't really be separated from it, because according to God, supposedly, you have to be around the people. That's such an important part of the religion, and
even in Mormonism, it was all about the community and marrying into someone prominent.
And to be absolutely frank, the community is the only thing religion has going for it. But yes, I think my explanation of trying to pray, trying so hard to believe, searching unendingly for God, for his truth, in and out of the Bible, for years of my life. Yes, I've tried it. And if you want to just run off of that, he doesn't answer when desperately needed. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't provide any kind of sense of relief or meaning, just failure when you can't live up to things on your own. And he provides nothing. If you want the people, they're cancerous, they're toxic. Some can be okay, but in general, as a group, those who are the worst people will rise to the front, the same as in capitalism. And it doesn't end well for anyone.
The loudest are the ones that get the most attention, and it's true in everything.
And you'll never find a group that doesn't care nearly as much. When I was, I'm going to say 17 or 18, we had a pastor. I hated the man. Horrible teachings, horrible sermons. He claimed that you couldn't have a gift if you weren't baptized. I wasn't baptized at that point, and he had already gone on record stating how I should be using my gifts for the church. He just didn't know I wasn't baptized. But after I had left that church, he got in a car accident, went off of the road trying to avoid a car while he was on a bicycle, flipped over the handlebars. He was wearing his helmet, but when he impacted the ground, the helmet snapped his head forward and it snapped his spine. He survived, but he's paralyzed for the rest of his life. He can't move. He can't interact anymore. And the church that had held him up as their leader and talked constantly about how important it was to care for those around you When he didn't get better within a couple months because he was permanently disabled, they kicked him out. They just cast him off to the side and got a new pastor. And within 2 or 3 months of them having gotten rid of him, there wasn't anyone in the church, since much of my family was still going there and was still interacting, and obviously enough was keeping me updated on what was happening. No one cared anymore that he was gone or what may have happened to him because he wasn't their pastor anymore. And that's a normal story among the Christian community. And then if you want to go by the book, if you want to add in the scripture, God's a piece of shit. He's actively a piece of shit.
Number 4, what would be, in your view, a better explanation for how the world came to be about? The Big Bang? Or God? What makes the most sense? Logically, consistently, theoretically, cosmologically.
Spoken like someone who doesn't actually have a concept or understanding of what the Big Bang is. No offense, dude. As someone who grew up in the religious background, it wasn't until I started doing my own research that I came to that understanding, because, let's be frank here, it's understanding they don't want you to have. The Big Bang is not some big explosion. I keep hearing a phrase, and I used to use the phrase and it makes me cringe now, a big bang requires a big banger. No, it doesn't. And anyone who says that and claims to be educated is a dumb fucker. Cosmologically speaking, a big bang makes more sense. Everything, scientifically speaking, a big bang makes more sense, and that's because a big bang is not a literal explosion. It refers to an expansion of time and space, and it refers to the point at which the Big Bang itself isn't necessarily an event. The Big Bang itself is the point at which our understanding of physics breaks down, so that we don't understand what's on the other side of this point. You can kind of look at it as, say, a point on a timeline, where up to that point, we understand how things work, and on the other side of the point on that timeline, things work entirely differently.
Number 5, is believing in God an inconsistent view, or do you just not like it?
Believing in God is highly inconsistent. You cannot claim to be believing in Jesus, which you have expressed Jesus and God as being the same thing, you've conflated them, without accepting the scripture. Which means your own deity is at odds with himself. He cannot have the properties that you ascribe him. He cannot have his own thoughts and abilities according to your own holy book. And this remains true for every holy book ever written. You haven't answered any of these in a while. You've been totally silent, Ferret.
Because I'm flabbergasted. It's inconsistent because everything is inconsistent in it. You cherry pick your views. You cherry pick everything about it. And not only that, of course I don't like it, personally. It's an opinion, sadly.
Number 6, do all humans understand morality the same way, and some just choose to act against that good morality?
Yes.
Absolutely not.
Really, because people will always go against their own personal moralities. It's...
The beginning of the question, do all humans understand morality?
Oh, that's
absolutely not.
Oh, I heard that differently, sorry.
Every group of humans on Earth has different moralities. And that you would ask that question suggests that you've never traveled or never paid any attention to a country other than your own. Let's honestly stick with my point of clarification so far of harming children, and let's hop over to Japan. You want to tell them about what's moral in Japan, Ferret?
Okay. They've had a long history of disgusting things. It was only just recently that they banned certain pedophilic things, and even after a while after that ban, they had a long time to get rid of that stuff. And in certain parts of Japan, the age of consent is 13. Now there's a caveat to that. Usually, you're allowed to give consent to another person that's around your age. If it's penetrative sex.
So that's moral, or do you assume everyone in Japan is simultaneously going against their morals because, I don't know, they all really like feeling up 13-year-olds? Every culture has a different morality. To go back in time, the Greeks, orgies were not immoral. Now, in modern America, we would consider orgies to be pretty immoral. Not illegal, but they're not moral. And it, according to Christians, very, very bad. Or here's a question for in return for you. Is polygamy moral? Do the Mormons have it right and you should have as many wives as possible? If no, then was Solomon and Abraham immoral? And if they were moral for their time as an answer, then obviously all people cannot share the same morality, and obviously objective morality cannot exist, to go back to your earlier question.
And number 7, how can we know who is right? How can we possibly know who has the correct answer?
We can't.
We can't. We don't.
No one ever knows who has the correct answer. However, it's sometimes very easy to fish out who has a wrong answer. When you went to school and you had multiple choice questions and you didn't necessarily know which one was right, A, B, C, D, or E, did they teach you to just always guess C right away, or did they say, look at the question, rule out the wrong answers first? I'm going to take a wild guess and say you don't know what the capital city of the country of Qatar is. I'll be honest, I don't know either. However, when I tell you that it's Lumpur, or that it's Oz, or the Lollipop Guild, you can pretty easily know you're wrong. You don't have to know that the capital is Doha, I looked it up, yes, to know that those answers are wrong. Similarly, I can't know who's right about what will happen when I die. Whether my consciousness will completely disperse, if my consciousness will in some way remain and be reformed into another consciousness, if it will be taken to some kind of afterlife. However, that doesn't mean that I can't tell that you're incorrect.
We can't prove anybody right or wrong. And that's the sad truth about life. There's no
I just expressed that we can prove people wrong.
In life, you have to make your own decisions. And in the end, you might be wrong. And in the end, you have to come to terms with that.
Number 8, and I know the answer to this question, but I want to know your answer. Does the Bible speak for every person who calls themselves a Christian?
No.
Depends. If you listen to the Christians, no. If you listen to what the Bible orders Christians to do, yes.
Oh.
According to the Bible, all scripture is useful for teaching and the edification.
But they tend to cherry pick at it.
Yes.
And
yes, that's the problem. When you force any Christian to come down to it, the answer is no, but according to their book, the answer is yes. Huh. So unless they would like to toss out their book, then the answer is yes. And if they begin tossing out parts of the book, then the question always becomes, where do you draw that line? Where do you acknowledge that Jesus or God exists from? Oh, Jesus came and he died for my sins. That's neat. How do you know that? You can't take the book because you say it doesn't speak for you. And the fallback I've always heard from apologeticists, and the one that I used back when I was still an apologetics person, is that, well, history backs up the story of Jesus. And it doesn't. The most history can do is establish that there is a religion called Christianity where they believe in this man called Jesus. Why do they believe in this man called Jesus? Because of the book. And if you get far enough back, because the disciples who told the people about the things and those people wrote the book.
I still find it weird that they tend to cherry pick it, so none of them actually believe in the same book, and they read it in different ways.
I suppose it's a tricky question, perhaps a slightly malformed one.
Let me explain. You have certain people that act ungodly, in my view, and do some things that I would say God never told them to do. That say they're Christian, that believe in the Bible. There was actually something brought up the last time I did 10 Questions for Atheists, and someone responded, and they said that a lot of Christians worked with Hitler, and, a lot of Catholics, and those are not Christians.
wrong.
That's a no true Scotsman fallacy. You do not get to choose whether or not Hitler was a Catholic. He was. Sorry, you don't get to just say, he was not a Christian. That's a no true Scotsman fallacy. They are still Christians. They've just cherry-picked different verses that you don't happen to like.
But that's my view. What would you say? Let me calm down. Does the Bible speak for every single Christian? Does every Christian represent the Bible?
Those are two very different questions. So I was correct. You have a malformed question on your hands, and I should have listened further. The question of does every Christian represent the Bible and does the Bible speak for every Christian are two very, very different questions.
And have two different connotations.
But either way, you actually have three questions here. One of which is, do people I don't consider to be Christians count as Christians? You can not consider them to be Christians all you want. They still are. They're just interpreting the religion differently from you. That's why there are so many different sects of Christianity. Because everyone translates it differently.
9. Is murder against the innocent wrong? And why? You could turn all of these questions to me, and I don't mind giving my answer. But please do not dismiss the question.
Why would I dismiss that question? First of all, yes, I could turn that question back to you as murder of the innocent wrong because your God has committed a great deal of murder against the innocent. So if your answer is anything other than no, then your God is wrong. However, you're correct. That is a dodge. You asked me a question. And in answer to my question, depends. It depends on the yardstick that we would wish to use. It depends on what we define as the innocent. It depends on what yardstick we are using. You're asking for an objective answer when, again, as stated earlier, you haven't established our yardstick for that objectivity. What is an innocent? Is a baby an innocent? Is abortion a murder? If all of those answers to those questions are yes, then no, that's not immoral. To bring a life into the world where it's not wanted or where it can't be properly cared for is what's immoral. Is an innocent someone who simply is a standby person in a war? Someone who is not actively involved in any kind of military war effort one way or the other? Are they an innocent? What if they're assisting the war effort, but they themselves are not in the war? What if they're not assisting the war effort, but they themselves do own a gun and they talk in their community about how important it is to assist the war effort? Now, what if that same person was living in Nazi Germany? Are they still an innocent? Or are they suddenly not because the war side they're supporting is Nazi Germany and that's not the quote-unquote right side of that war? What if it was a less defined war? What if it was a French colonist during the French-Indian-American War? They were still on the quote-unquote wrong side of the conflict, but it's a much less cut-and-dry conflict considering the early colonial Americas were the aggressors in that war, and if anything, were the wrong ones in that war. And the French were the right ones, but they lost the war, so history sees them as the wrong ones. Until you define what an innocent is, your question is meaningless. And until you provide a yardstick for measurement, your question remains meaningless.
Do we have a personal yardstick?
Well, I suppose that's one way we could answer the question, is to pull out our own yardstick for what we would consider an innocent to attempt to answer that question. I suppose at that instance, let's cut anything involving war off the table for murder.
Okay, why?
Because at that point, the question becomes what counts as an innocent, what counts as self-defense, which side is the innocent, which side isn't, as I just expressed. So let's cut anything like that out. As expressed, let's cut abortion off the list, since that's an entire argument one way or the other.
Yep.
Let's say murder only refers to like a serial killing style murder where you shoot or stab or bludgeon another person at random on the street. Something you would see in your usual true crime podcast, right?
Yep.
What would be our yardstick for innocence?
The everyday person, maybe?
So they probably have done plenty of bad things, but nothing that... Would we say that innocence is that it doesn't warrant what happens to them?
Yeah, it doesn't warrant what happens to them.
Okay. And that they've done nothing against the person who does it, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay. In that instance, I would say, yes, it is wrong. However, I'm stating that through my objective yardstick that is on top of that, where what I'm defining as right and wrong is based on the safety and betterment of humans and their society.
Basically, we're like, what's the best for the group?
However, you can easily see that this is such a difficult question to answer, because if we take the innocent person and we tweak a tiny thing about them, for instance, everything else is exactly the same. However, they snuck up behind me, not snuck, but they walked up behind me and I didn't hear them coming while I was hunting in the woods. And I freaked out upon hearing them, turned around, and reactively shot them. We wouldn't necessarily call that wrong. That's an accident.
It's a tragic accident, but it's still an accident.
Or, to move to another country, since these questions reveal you don't know that much outside of what I can only assume is your own country of America, depends. If I were to go to the Middle East and the person is gay, then suddenly the answer to that question changes according to them.
Yep.
Where, of course not, they're not innocent.
Number 10, what is your confirmation and foundation for truth?
I believe that I've expressed that in various ways throughout these questions, but I do, fair play to you, it does need to be laid out and properly expressed in one question. My foundation for truth is what cannot be disproved. My foundation for truth is what you are able to, with scientific rigor, look at and say, this occurs reliably. I think, however, your bigger question is, how would you know Christianity isn't true if it doesn't fall under your truth claim? And at that point, the question becomes, how do I establish what is falsehood, which is the flip of the coin from truth? And at that point, the answer is, I look for inconsistencies. I look for when someone doesn't want me to know or think about certain things. I look for deception. Where you can find those things, you can find distruth.
I personally don't think there's any truth. Ever since I was a smaller person, I've noticed that you can only make your own truths and grow from there. That's why I don't mind Otter's views, as long as he doesn't shove it onto me, and he doesn't. I'm a really simple girl.
All right, guys, those are my 10 questions. Have fun. I'm so excited to see the answers that you come up with. I tell you, I'm thrilled. And most importantly, God bless y'all.
I didn't hate him.
I liked that outro. I liked you. I might question, based on the fact you said you've already done this list once before, and your dismissiveness to some of the answers you received, if you are really listening to the answers you receive. However, you seem a lot more willing to actually converse and listen and hear the other side and acknowledge certain points than a lot of other people that I see online, and a lot of other people that I interacted with growing up and throughout my life as a Christian. That's appreciated. No ill will to you, and hopefully you're able to get something out of our answers.
Even if you don't, thank you for listening to us, alright?
Have a great day.